Coming up just after midnight, March 24th, 1989. The skipper of the Exxon Valdez on the radio. At daybreak, a dark discovery and darker days to follow.
Animals were dying. Sea otters and seabirds and whales and fish. We all got PTSD just from seeing the animals die.
30 years and counting, how the fight against complacency continues.
Our focus is mainly to prevent it.
Ahead, the Exxon Valdez spill, both then and now.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to Frontiers on this Sunday, March 24th. It is 30 years to the day that the Exxon Valdez ran aground in Prince William Sound, one of the darkest days in Alaska history. Valdez was the epicenter of this man-made disaster. The oil tanker was headed through the Valdez Narrows when it struck Bligh Reef at 12:04 in the morning. That was Captain Joe Hazelwood's first message on the radio, 23 minutes after the tanker ran aground. 40 minutes later, he told Coast Guard Commander Steve McCall that he had tried to rock the ship free.
Okay, we're pretty good shape right now, stability-wise. We're trying to extract her off the skull here. You can probably see me on your radar, and once I get underway, I'll let you know. Do another damage control assessment, over. Roger, yeah. Again, before you make any drastic attempt to get underway, make sure you don't start doing any ripping. You got a rising tide, you got another about an hour and a half worth of tide in your favor. Once you hit that max, I wouldn't recommend doing much wiggling, over.
In the days that followed, the oil would spread more than 460 miles and pollute 1,300 miles of coastline, about 200 of that heavily oiled. People said you could smell the fumes from miles away, but it's what they saw that still haunts them today. Carcasses of animals and birds, among them 2,800 sea otters and 250,000 seabirds. Waters that once gave life now brought death and disease. Even the very first hours of the spill, it was clear that the ALYESKA pipeline company, the company that operates the pipeline and the Valdez terminal, was not at all prepared. We asked the current president of ALYESKA about then and now.
Our focus is mainly to prevent it. Once oil gets in the water, it's very hard to deal with.
If the Exxon Valdez spill had happened today, how much different would it be?
Well, I'd like to think that it wouldn't happen, certainly not the way it did. Today, you've got double hull tankers, so if it happened today, the tanker might have gone up on the reef. If it did, it wouldn't hole. It would be tethered. When it goes out there, we have a tug tethered to it at that point in the transit, so it would keep it in the shipping lane or where it was supposed to be. We scout the ice. There's a lot less ice these days. Probably wouldn't have diverted. We have response barges staged in the Outer Sound. Back then we had That one barge, about 12,000 barrel capacity. Today we've got 7, about 600,000 barrels. So, but the focus is prevention. I mean, that's kind of where we go, is to not have spills.
Many people have said that one of the biggest lessons from this spill is that complacency costs.
Well, it did. If you looked at the Exxon, a lot of it was human behavior. As long as you've got people, there's a risk from automation as well. But I'd like to think that technology would enable us to manage our operation even more safely and more reliably and more efficiently in a way that is respectful of our environment and doesn't harm it. You always got to keep looking forward. If we focus totally from a risk profile point of view on the Exxon Valdez, we're going to miss the next thing, because I don't think the Exxon Valdez is going to happen again.
It's not so much what happened before, but what could happen that's different.
Anticipation. That's the tough part. It's anticipating where the risks really are today and what they'll be like going forward, and most importantly, what we can do to mitigate those risks.
You know, it's kind of an interesting vantage point to be at the 30-year milestone. So what comes to mind for you?
Well, I think it's always a reminder that our job carries a lot of risk. We can't have those kind of events, so there's always a prompt you get from that.
Do you think at the 40-year mark, 10 years from now, that we might still find vestiges of oil and, spill damage?
Yeah, because they've made a conscious decision, at least for now, that trying to get it up might do more harm than good.
What do you expect to be said at 40 years?
Well, I'd expect taps to still be functioning safely. I'd like to think we're still moving product.
We asked ExxonMobil if the corporation had anything to say at this 30-year milestone, and we received this statement. We deeply regret the incident. While it was a low point in our long history, it also served as a turning point and catalyst that prompted our management to completely reevaluate how the company understands and manages risk. The company's approach to safety in the aftermath of the incident has produced meaningful improvements, including declines in marine spills. Putting safety first has had the added benefit of strengthening our business. Well, coming up, Cordova's 30-year journey of healing.
She looked across the blackened sound, broken-hearted at what she found.
From songs to sermons, the many ways this small fishing town keeps the lessons of the spill alive.
She sang, ooh.
Although the oil flowed away from Cordova, it was still one of the hardest hit from the spill. It's about 50 miles southeast of Valdez at the mouth of the Copper River, one of Alaska's most valuable salmon runs. In 1989, the town had a lot of fishing permits and new boats, but when the fishing crashed, so did Cordova. And Joe Villahil, along with Will Mader, our Frontiers photojournalist, joins us now. You talked to a lot of people when you went to Cordova. How are they doing 3 decades later?
You know, I will have to say that initially, when we started calling people to set this up, there was some hesitation for people to talk to us. They didn't really want to talk about it all the time. They say, you know, reporters, they come in and they go out, they talk about the anniversary.
And you're just another one.
Yeah, and here we come in again. But I will say this, though. All of the people that we called actually did talk to us, every single one of them. That's because they still have something to say 30 years later.
On the surface, there are no apparent signs of what happened 30 years ago in Prince William Sound. Near the ferry dock in Cordova, otters gather for another lazy day. A recovered species after the loss of 3,000 of them after the spill. But below the surface, closer to the spill, it's clear the oil is still here.
Listening to National Public Radio on the radio and grinding my coffee, we get that news that, you know, just right out around the corner what had happened.
A camp caretaker at the time, David Janka, got in his skiff to see what was happening. He snapped some of the first photos of what would be the worst environmental disaster in Alaska history.
The lack of any activity was startling. It was calm for 3 days where a lot of work could have been done.
Janka, who now helps with research projects and gives natural history tours on his boat, tracks and documents oil that still lingers just beneath the rocks on nearby islands.
It's still toxic, not much different than what the oil was like just a few days after it was spilled or hit the beach. We've got to keep paying attention.
She looked across the blackened sound, broken-hearted at what she found.
And 30 years later, when you dig deeper and talk to the people of Cordova, you will find that the pain is still here too.
Visions of dying otters, fish, and birds filled her mind, and the cries she heard.
Malani Towle wrote this song to describe the struggles of her mom for the 10th anniversary of the spill.
Thinking about this anniversary, I was sort of thinking about, truthfully, part of me doesn't really want to talk about it anymore. But then I thought about it, and I think the importance of celebrating anniversaries like this is to remember what can happen.
Around town, we found the message not just in song.
So March 24th, 1989. I think most of us remember that day.
But church sermons too.
The sun was out, the sun was shining, and 50 miles away from us, the ocean was covered in black goo. Animals were dying.
Reverend Belle Mickelson, ordained in part to help people heal from the spill, asking the community to do something that the community may find hard to do.
One of the things that Jesus tells us is really important and really hard is that we need to forgive. We need to forgive the oil companies. We need to work together with them to build a better world.
I've been working on this for, I think, 6 days now.
Tucked away in his Cordova shop,
It's very satisfying for me, and I feel like I'm connecting myself with my past.
we found commercial fisherman Mike Weber doing a little more wood carving than fishing these days.
Yeah, I broke a neck, and my neck really badly, and almost died from it, and got wrapped up in a deck winch, and my raincoat got stuck in it and pulled me in.
It turned into a life lesson of healing that he has applied to something else.
When you look at an individual's book of life, there's always a lot of dark chapters in a book, and in this book of life, the oil spill was definitely one of them, and it lasted a long time.
The loss of fish, the financial losses, the depression, the people who passed away, the people who left and never came back.
I feel better about things right now. The sound is rebounding. Our ecosystems are coming back. Like my kids' age, all their friends are coming back, and that's exciting because this is home to them.
Do you think there will ever come a point where you're fully healed, if you will?
For an individual, for me, I think so. I've had a lot of events happen in my lifetime where healing was a major aspect of getting over incidents. So I think I learned to accept things. And once you accept things, change starts to happen, and forgiveness.
Maybe forgiving.
She looked across the blackened sound, broken-hearted at what she found.
But never forgetting 3 decades later.
Now, Reverend Mickelson did say that there are some people who just can't talk about the spill, don't want to because it's still that painful this far out.
Boy, there's a fragility there, but also a strength.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, and speaking of strength, how about the strength of the fisheries there? They're beginning to recover. At the 30-year mark, where are they?
Well, as far as the herring fishery
That's
goes,
the biggie.
the short answer is no, absolutely not. And we heard this from fishermen. We heard this from people in town. We heard this from the Science Center. We're told that it took a couple years for the fish to decline. They made a bit of a comeback, but then they declined again. And at this point, the numbers just aren't there. They didn't really come back. And, you know, there's scientific debate about why that happens. Some say it's definitely because of the spill. Others say it is not. But the bottom line is the fish are not there, and that is a huge, huge deal for Cordova and the rest of the communities there.
You're going to have more stories on the news next week.
Yeah, a few more stories coming up next week. We talked to a lot of people when we were there.
All right, thank you very much,
Sure.
Joe V. Hill. Up next, what we now know 30 years later. Rick Steiner joins us. As a young biologist, he followed the spill from the very start. Today, that journey goes on. Until the Deepwater Horizon blowout in the Gulf of Mexico, the Exxon Valdez spill was the biggest in the United States. The National Transportation Safety Board listed a number of causes: the third mate's failure to navigate the tanker, as well as possible fatigue from overwork. The captain's failure to provide a proper navigation watch, possibly due to impairment from alcohol. Exxon's failure to properly supervise the ship's captain and to provide a rested and capable crew. The NTSB also cited the Coast Guard's failure to provide a proper vessel traffic system, as well as effective pilot and escort services. And all of this can pretty much be summed up in one word: complacency. And joining us now to talk about that, Rick Steiner, a conservation biologist who has been dealing with fighting complacency since the beginning of the spill. 30 years later, do you feel that that's still the enemy, complacency?
Without question, yeah. One preeminent lesson we learned from Exxon Valdez is you have to be vigilant in preventing these things in the first place. Once they've happened, you've lost the battle. There has never been an effective major marine oil spill cleaned up or responded to. And I remember one native elder that year called it the day the water died. And that sort of summed it up. I mean, you said in your lead, this was one of the darkest days in Alaska history, without question. And all of us that were on the beaches in those first few years and involved in it very vividly remember that.
Well, one of the things that everybody talks about, you know, as far as their PTSD over this is the death of the animals, you know, that we saw. 2,800 otters die, 250,000 seabirds.
It was a massive environmental impact, and we're still dealing with it today. It still has not fully recovered. This turns out to have been, while not the largest in terms of oil spills globally, one of, if not the most ecologically damaging spills anywhere ever.
Now we're looking at Natalie Phobes' photographs. She's one of many people that you went out and saw. Lots of people you probably crossed paths with, but when you look at her pictures, what do you think?
Well, I mean, you see you are reminded, and it's important to do this every anniversary, of the extraordinary environmental and human toll that this oil spill took.
This looks dangerous. Any long-term health consequences on the cleanup?
Apparently, there has certainly been some physiological impairment that people suffered from inhaling these vapors of it's a toxic substance, oil is. It's well known for its toxicity. So anyone exposed to it on your skin, breathing the vapors and such like that, had some benzene dosing at least.
Now, one of the things that the president of ALYESKA said, Tom Barrett, is that he personally questions the use of dispersants. He wants to see more research on that. And we've got a map of the spill and how it progressed. And obviously the dispersants weren't effective, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you need to look at all possible tools, but dispersants are generally out of favor in many of the scientific community these days, as well as the spill response community. Some oil companies, I'm glad to hear Mr. Barrett say that, because oil companies love dispersants because it removes the oil from the surface.
He wants more research.
Yeah, and there should be, and also ignition, but mechanical recovery is really what they actually get it out of the environment, not to just disperse it further into the marine system, is what they need to research. But regardless, there has never been an effective response to a major marine oil spill. I think we need to assume that there never really will be. And so everything needs to focus on prevention. And what really concerned me about Mr. Barrett's attitude was it seemed like there was a little bit of that old overconfidence that this was very unlikely to happen.
He didn't think it would be unlikely to happen.
We're better off in Prince William Sound with the SERVs, the ship escort, the tug system, and RCAC, and the better vessel traffic system. Without question, it could still happen easily. Look at the space shuttle program, the Challenger, then the Columbia. Look at Fukushima. Look at the Boeing 737-800 MAXs. These were supposed to be the best of the best. Still, this automated system operator interface failed, and that can happen.
Now, you mentioned the RCAC, the Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council. That, I've heard, is one of the bigger success stories.
I'll tell you what, it allows me to go to sleep at night, knowing that this council is there holding the feet to the fire of government and industry to make absolutely certain that they've got the best system in place.
Now, this has been touted as a model, but yet you see a resistance, like in our state, to having these advisory councils because they fear it'll slow down development.
And it is part of responsible development. We tried to set up the RCAC 2 years prior to Exxon Valdez. The oil industry would not have it, state government and the Coast Guard would not have it. I still feel to this day that had we been successful, the Exxon Valdez never would have happened. We need one in the Aleutians, we need one in the Bering Strait and Arctic region for Arctic shipping. We need to take the lessons from Prince William Sound and apply them, you know, as smart people that we are, apply them in the Aleutians and the Bering Strait during the shipping season.
So I want to bring up the Deepwater Horizon spill because you were involved with that, called to help. Did the Alaska experience help in the Gulf?
Absolutely. I mean, we learned here the long-term sort of unanticipated injuries, ecological injuries, and human injuries that can come from these sorts of major oil spills. That helped in the Gulf immensely. All these oil spills around the world, and I've been involved in many of them, they have their similarities and their uniquenesses as well. The Deepwater Horizon was horrible, and they learned a lot from our mistakes here. We've learned a lot from other mistakes, but we need to apply those in the Aleutians and the Bering Strait and get it right.
Well, I want to ask you, because this comes up as, what about Captain Joe Hazelwood? You know, and it was debated during his trial, and he did serve time serving at Bean's Cafe of all things. But
picking up litter along the highway here and such like that.
But you know, his drinking was thought to have been a factor, not totally responsible. But what's he doing today?
He's actually teaching, or at least the last I knew, a few years ago, he was teaching maritime safety at a institute in New York, and it's good. He was actually well reputed to be a very competent tanker skipper. He left the bridge under the command of a third mate that didn't know what he was doing, and they left it on autopilot. Thought they were turning it back into the lanes. The automated system ran them into Bligh Reef. So there were a number of mistakes, systemic failures. The oil industry, the Coast Guard, the state of Alaska, and all of us.
So quickly, we have about 15 seconds left. In the next 40 years, what do you hope to say or see?
I hope to see better recovery in the system, in the environmental system. I hope to see escort tugs in the Aleutian Islands and in the Bering Strait during the shipping season, and the best possible prevention system nationally that we can possibly put.
Thank you, Rick Steiner. Appreciate you being here. Well, we're going to leave you with a song that Malani Towle wrote when she was just 14 years old. It was called What Exxon Means, and looks at the spill through her mother's eyes. It's hard to sum up what the spill means to Alaska 30 years later, but we hope we've given you a sense of what it means to the Alaskans who experienced the spill both then and now. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.
She looked across the blackened sound, broken-hearted at what she found. Her home, her family, everything she knew had been covered.